Oh, there's nothing frightening about this spider. He won't bite you. Just hold him in your hand. It's going to be fine. It usually doesn't work in order to get us to do that. So it doesn't work with dogs either. We want to let them have a little control. If they want to hide behind the chair, let them hide behind the chair. And that brings us into fight or flight. That's the choice your fearful dog has. I can fight or I can flight. The one we prefer, of course, is flight. And these are referred to as ADR and PDR. It's active defense reflex or passive defense reflex. So the active defense reflex would be fight, and the passive defense reflex would be flight. And like I said, we want to encourage our dogs, and perhaps we have to even teach our dogs that flight is the option we want them to choose. Once we have our dog, flighting and not fighting, that's a good first step. But then we're going to want to work on some of this fear. And some of the methods we're going to use for that are things like classical conditioning and desensitization. And this can be a little bit murky for some people. So I do have a slide coming up next just to quickly define that. We're not going to get into a lot of behavioral jargon, but we're just going to quickly clear that up for you so you understand exactly what the next step would be after this. Now, one of the first things you need to do is you need to know your dog's triggers and thresholds. There's no way around this one. You have to know your dog's triggers and thresholds. So what is a trigger? A trigger is what elicits the behavior. A trigger is what starts the reaction. Okay, so there's many different triggers for many dogs. Some examples might be a trigger could be another dog. Trigger could be tall men in hats. Trigger could be lawnmowers. Whatever your dog's afraid of, that's the trigger. Now, the threshold is the point, and it's important to understand thresholds. The threshold is the point before the dog's emotions change. The point before, not after he changes. The threshold is the actual moment we're looking for. The point before. The dog is fine 1 minute, the next minute he's not. The threshold was just before that changed. He's walking down the street having a lovely walk, and all of a sudden his hackles goes up, he hides behind the owner, etc. He's over threshold at that point. But the point just before he went over that's the point we need to be concerned with, because we need to always keep our fearful dog under threshold. Every time we allow the dog to go over threshold, and you notice I said allow the dog because really it's up to us to manage this situation. Every time we allow the dog to go over threshold, the behavior and the fear becomes more deeply rooted. They practice just like anything. You practice, you get good at it. And the other thing that's bad about going over threshold is you lost your learning opportunity. Dogs cannot learn when they're over threshold. They cannot think. They can only react. So one of the first things I do when I'm working with fearful dogs on my private consulting is, of course, to sit down with the owners and identify all the dog's triggers and what are the thresholds to those specific triggers. So you need to know that. That's a good starting place right there. Is it a good idea to punish fear? No, of course not. You can't punish a fear. It's absolutely silly. A dog does a reaction because he's afraid. You get mad at the dog, you make the dog even more afraid. We're counter doing what we need to do here. Just imagine yourself if somebody walks up behind you, creeps up and you don't hear them coming, and they jump on your shoulders, and you yell and you react, and they punish you for that. Well, that's just going to make you feel even worse. It's certainly not going to help you not have a startle reaction next time. You're probably not going to trust this person much anymore either. So punishing a fear, never a good idea. Never, never, never. Know your plan of action when you leave the house or you're in the house or whatever the fear may be, because there's all kinds of possibilities out there. But know your plan of action. Visualize it in your mind, what it's going to look like, what you're going to do. So when it comes and your own adrenaline starts, you can still easily pull off your plan of action flawlessly. And I know it's not always perfect, but again, we need to practice. We need to get ourselves ready for this so we can do this and we can be in control of our own mental and physical responses. Fearful dogs are controlled by their hind brain, the part of the brain that's the reptilian brain where the amygdala is. And once this part of the brain is controlling our dog, they can't think, they can't learn. All they do is react. They don't respond, they react. So we need to get the dog's brain out of that mode. And there's one little trick I'll give you here right now kind of quickly is we teach the dog to go find it. So what you do is you start this in your house and you take a treat and you toss it behind the dog and you say go find it. So he sniffs the ground, he looks around for it, and then when he finds it he comes back and he looks to you for more treats. You do this again, go find it. He sniffs the ground, looks back at you, gets another treat, so on and so forth. So the dog is either sniffing the ground or looking at you. So he's having quite a good time here. Remember, hunting is amazing fun for dogs. They're hunting for amazing treats. What is more fun than that? So the best way to get this into our dog's memory, because habit is memory, we want this to become a habit for the dog. So what we're going to do here is we're going to work on this 3 minutes. Then we're going to take a break for 3 hours. Then we're going to work on again for 3 minutes. And do this every day for a couple of weeks till this becomes habit. Once we have habit in the dog's brain, then we can go ahead and we can take it to the streets. So then we can work on it with distractions around us. And then when we really need it in our fearful situation outside, perhaps we can say, go find it. And the dog is hunting and he's looking at you. So when the dog is hunting and looking at you, he is not in the hindbrain mode. He's in the fun mode of his brain, and therefore he can learn, and it sets him up for success. The purpose of desensitization is to reduce the dog's anxiety or fear through gradual exposure to the object. Now remember, we must always keep the dog under threshold, so we need to start at a point that causes the dog no discomfort at all. And then we move very gradually closer to the object or the behavior of concern. The opposite of desensitization would be sensitization. An example of this would be flooding. Flooding is prolonged and forced exposure to the thing that is frightening the dog. For example, if your dog has a fear of children and you take your dog to a school playground thinking it will help him to get used to them, this may cause sensitization and the dog's behavior may become worse. Now, if you did this at a distance and with calm children in a controlled manner that caused the dog no anxiety whatsoever and worked from there, this very well could work. Keeping in mind you have to start at the dog's threshold, which may be 200 yards away. So we really do need to know our dog's triggers and thresholds. Now, we often pair up desensitization with counter conditioning. For example, instead of just moving the dog gradually closer to the children, we would pair that up with when the children appear, we would give the dog a tasty food treat. Two other methods of training that we use often are classical conditioning and operant conditioning. Now remember, conditioning is just simply another word for learning. Basically, the difference between classical and operant conditioning is this. With classical conditioning, we are freely giving the dog something good, example food, which is a primary reinforcer. We pair this up with the scary thing. We are simply trying to change the emotional feeling that the dog has over something. When we do this enough, we can create a new association for the dog and the stimulus. Example would be, your dog has a fear of strangers. Every time a stranger appears, food comes out. As soon as the stranger leaves, food goes away. So the dog starts to associate the stranger with good things, i.e. food, and therefore creates a new association. Operant conditioning is basically teaching the dog a behavior and then rewarding him for doing it so that it's likely to be repeated. For example, we could teach our dog to sit for greetings and therefore he no longer jumps on people. So basically we cue the behavior, the dog gives the behavior, and we reward the behavior or reinforce it. Okay, we're going to quickly discuss the dog's senses. We're going to start with sight. Sight is not one of the dog's best senses, unless you're, of course, talking about a sighthound, which hunts by sight. And even then, the sight that they have most developed is movement. They can see movement from a distance quite far. They see movement better than we do. Their colors are not as well as what we would see. They don't see red, green pretty much at all. Their best colors are white and yellow. Even gray they can see, but white and yellow sticks out for them. So it's kind of weird when you try to get inside the dog's mind and think what the world must look like to them. If they're not seeing green, then, perhaps the grass all looks the same as the snow. You know, it's kind of weird to think about. Like they don't see the green trees. Maybe they see shades of gray and yellow. They do see a bit of blue, and our group color, MGAP's group color, happens to be royal blue. And I know that whenever we put on our royal blue gear, our shirts, polo shirts or sweatshirts, wherever we happen to be going, we usually wear an MGAP shirt. And as soon as the dog sees the shirt, they know that something's going on that day, and maybe they're going to get to go to a meet and greet, which they love, so they get all excited. So they do see blue as well. Now, they don't have the depth perception that we do, and that's one of the reasons that stairs can be such a tricky thing for dogs to learn. They don't have that ability. So you'll see your dogs, overstepping or understepping and not knowing quite sure how to do that. So that's the reason for that. Now, their peripheral vision is what if they're looking straight ahead, how far can they see, behind them? Humans, it's pretty much a straight line. If you put your hands out to your shoulders and you go at about 180 degrees from your eyes, you're going to see your hands. But as you start to move them back farther, you're going to find that very quickly you're not going to be able to see your hands anymore. Well, an average dog has about 250 degrees of peripheral vision. A Greyhound, even more, 270. And that's due to the shape of their head. Look at this Greyhound's head here in the picture. You see how their head is shaped smaller than their neck. That's one of the reasons why Greyhounds have to wear, special collars, martingale collars, a regular buckle collar, because if you tighten it around the neck, nice and snug, it's just going to pop off the head because the head is smaller than the neck. But that smaller head is what gives them that extra peripheral vision for hunting. The next sense we're going to talk about is taste. Taste is not that important for dogs, but they do need some of it for survival. One note here is that puppies chew to taste, not to destroy. Dogs that are chewing to destroy things, that's a whole different matter. Usually has to do with some pretty severe separation anxiety. But when puppies go around, what they're really trying to do is taste their world. Now look at humans compared to dogs. Humans have a much higher developed taste system than dogs do. 9,000 taste buds compared to 1,700. That's a big difference. Now, dogs don't have the taste for salt. It's not needed. Dogs are in the wild mostly eating wild meat, which is full of salt, so they don't need to go out and hunt for salt. So therefore, it's not a necessity for them to have that. Dogs do have a lot of bitter taste buds, so they don't have a taste for bitter at all. This is what helps them in their survival in picking what berries and plants that they would be safe to eat in the wild. Also, that's why you see some of the dog repellent sprays for furniture and things like that with a bitter taste to it. You can either get the bitter apple or the sour grape. And these work for some dogs. They don't work for other dogs. And the thing you want to do if you are going to try one of these dog repellents is to make sure that you put enough of the repellent on the back of the dog's tongue the first time you use it, because just getting a diffused taste on his tongue from a little bit sprayed over a leg of a chair is not going to be enough to deter him. The taste is not going to be that bad to stop him. And that's what most people do. They just get the spray and they spray the object. But what you have to do is really coat a Q-tip, for example, and roll that Q-tip around the back of the tongue. Sounds a bit cruel, but if you want to use that method, that's what you have to do to make the dog not want to go and chew that item. They really need a good taste for it because, like I said, it's just not strong enough just when you spray it like that. And the other thing that when you're using those type of of items is that you have to spray them often. Some people think they last for weeks or days, but really you have to spray it every day, sometimes twice a day. So that's just a little side note on that. Now it's interesting, dogs can taste water. I find that's kind of interesting that they have a taste developed to taste different types of water. Again, this is back to survival in the wild, what is healthy for a dog and what is dangerous for a dog. Okay, the big one for dogs, their sense of smell. This is really how the dog sees a world, is through his smell. The part of the dog's brain that's devoted to smell is 40 times larger than in humans. That's huge. Okay, think about that. Think how much better their scent is than us. Humans have approximately 5 million scent receptors, while dogs have up to 300 million. I mean, that's a lot. Those dogs that have 300 million, those would be dogs like your bloodhounds, dogs that are scent hounds. Your greyhounds, for example, may have something like 200 million. It's still a heck of a lot more than humans, but depending on the type of the dog, the breed, it varies.